X-Men Evolution is, by this point, as some of you know, one of my absolute favorite pieces of X-Men media ever. It's actually what got me into a lot of the different X-Men characters. For example, I didn't like Kitty almost at all growing up. I didn't like her, and I just was never really interested in reading a ton of X books or anything with her where she was the main focus. And it was really because she was always at odds with this other member of the X-Men that I really enjoyed reading for some reason. I just can't put my finger on it. Anyways, without further ado, I really want to get into talking about Kitty in this show, because I think the first season did her extremely well. Kitty was introduced in episode 2, and from the offset of getting to know Kitty, we understand pretty early on with her character, she is extremely smart. Kitty was often top of her class, but she was also somewhat ostracized from a lot of the popular people at school, and of course this caused her to have a slight bit of anxiety and nightmares, and that all doesn't help with the fact that Kitty has just now started to develop her mutant abilities going into her later stages of high school. And of course, Xavier gets wind of this, and as per usual, he wants to go seek out these kids to make them child soldiers. I mean, help them develop their mutant abilities. Even if Kitty doesn't want that at all for herself. She doesn't want to even believe the fact that she is a mutant, and she pretty much just wants to ignore any and all signs of her mutation because she doesn't want to be any more different than she already is. Kitty already feels ostracized, and she already feels othered, as though she is different for her intelligence and lack of athletic ability. So of course, when Charles Xavier comes to the door offering to give Kitty a place where she can hone her powers and essentially out the fact that she is not like everyone else, Kitty has absolutely zero interest in wanting to do that at all, and neither do her parents. Because damn if she doesn't get it already just being at school.
Riley, check the kitty pity party.
Dreading PE, no doubt. Probably the only class she's not acing.
Let's, give her some time off,
I mean, Kitty just has it pretty rough. I've never been locked in a locker before, but as somebody who doesn't love tight, small, confined spaces, that is not for me. Thankfully for Kitty, she meets someone named Lance, and as well, she has her mutant ability to phase. So Kitty is able to get out of there, but in the process she ends up meeting Lance, a character that will be integral to Kitty's arc throughout a majority of X-Men Evolution as a show. But for right now, she's more or less just freaked out because the dude's power is crazy. He pretty much causes avalanches wherever he goes. And for right now, Kitty wants absolutely nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, she just wants to hide away from any and all responsibility that might come with being a mutant and any of the differences. And that's where Jean comes in. She basically tries to big sister Kitty into getting her to accept her mutant abilities. It doesn't work very well.
You and your wonderful new gift. I don't have any gifts, just a curse. Only if you let it be. I'd like to help you understand it. Together we—
Look, I don't want any of this. It's like hard enough just being normal, you know?
Jean does genuinely try her best to present being a mutant in a very positive light for Kitty, to try and explain that it can be a benefit and not just simply a curse, especially with a power that Kitty has, which is phasing, something she seems to be able to control at a decent clip already with very little training. Jean really does like to adopt the bigger sister role throughout this show, and I think it's great, but she falls flat in this scenario. Instead, we see Lance sort of fill that void of showing Kitty that being a mutant doesn't have to be terrible. And I think that's simply because Kitty just has a straight up weakness for any sort of half decent looking guy in this show, and I feel like it's just a running gag. Regardless, Lance makes Kitty feel safe, makes her feel good about her powers. Like her powers can be used to help other people and to actually achieve things. In my opinion, Lance low-key takes advantage of Kitty while she's at her most vulnerable and lowest, which is in this episode in all honesty. and he ends up using Kitty to try and cheat his way through high school and get his grades changed.
Like, totally unbelievable.
You're making it yours, Kitty. Once you own it, nothing can own you.
They never really fleshed this out after this episode, and that really kind of bothered me because Lance genuinely just felt like the dude was taking advantage of somebody in a vulnerable situation, and they later try to paint him as more sympathetic, which does kind of work, but with this episode in mind, it feels a little bit weird, especially because Lance, in his destructive use of his powers with very little training, nearly gets Kitty herself killed. I mean, of course, Kitty survived, this is a kid's show, but like, my point stands. And for Kitty, this was the turning point in which she decided and made the decision to go to Xavier's Institute for Gifted Youngsters. This is when she chose to finally try and embrace being a mutant, even if she still didn't necessarily want to be that much different. And of course, much like other characters in this show, after their introduction episode, they're each given a slightly smaller role, but they always appear in each and every episode. Kitty especially gives me some of my most joyous moments in this show. She's often used for a lot of the comedic relief, and between her and Nightcrawler, their scenes, especially shared scenes, are some of my favorite throughout this first season, outside of characters such as Spike, just because I have my own personal bias towards him. And I just want to take a second just to show a couple of my favorite scenes, especially because Kitty basically is just like Spike in the event that she gets 2 episodes that are truly dedicated to her, and then the rest of the time is more spent on the background. But I find they did it far better with Kitty, as though they had planned for her to be around the entire show, as though they had planned for her in the first season to stick around completely. And I just felt they didn't do that with a character such as Spike. Again, Kitty felt extremely well thought out in this show and very well characterized, and just highly enjoyable. And I especially liked the time and episodes she shared with Logan that I'll get to later in this video, because those two characters just bounce off of each other so well.
Ew, that stuff like totally plugs your arteries, you know?
I appreciate your concern.
And on a completely unrelated side note, I am an absolute sucker for seeing the X-Men just act like a family and eat breakfast together, something the later seasons didn't do as much, but man, did it just feel great to watch in these early seasons. The next episode in which Kitty's actually decently relevant in is one of my favorites from the season, Spike Cam. Now, Kitty, let's take it back to when Rogue finally joined X-Men Evo's X-Men team. And when Rogue joined, Kitty was actually extremely welcoming to her and found her pretty novel, especially in the fact that she chose to swap sides to the good guys. But I guess when you start to live with somebody, opinions can change pretty quick, as the two often bitter, like overly angry sisters. And we see this a lot in Spike Cam specifically, where Kitty wants to be a part of a play because a guy she likes is doing it, and Rogue believes she is made for that type of a play because it's about vampires and she's all gothic. And the two characters are butting heads hard in this episode, especially when it comes to Rogue just being her natural sassy goth self. And of course, we still got that trope of Kitty pretty much falling for any half-decent looking guy on this show. Man, it's just kind of wrong.
Just when I thought you could not possibly get more pathetic.
At least I've got a hope of getting cast, unlike you.
And of course, with the two characters wanting to compete for the same spot in the play, they're going to be butting heads. And of course, Spike doesn't help any of this by recording the entire thing, which only sets off Rogue even further. But later in the episode, Spike decides on a novel concept that he should instead try and help them for once. He gets Rogue and Kitty to actually agree to practice with one another, and decides that Rogue and Kitty should be able to do it both together, and they would both earn a spot in the play, and he'd also be able to complete one of his assignments. I mean, the two girls agree, but like, Rogue just was not good at dancing at all, and Kitty doesn't help it by the fact that she just picks at Rogue for not being able to dance properly either. Their sort of bickery, sister-type relationship was one of my favorites throughout this first season. I'm gonna be honest, this episode isn't of huge, major importance of anything to do with Kitty's arc in this first season. I just really like it, and I really like the dynamic and relationship Kitty has with the X-Men in this show, and any excuse to talk about it at length, I'm going to take. The last episode of the season that Kitty is actually genuinely relevant in is an episode all about how she feels like she can't find any time to herself living in this mansion with a bunch of other people. Kitty was an only child and didn't have very many siblings, and so now having to not only deal with having a roommate in Rogue, who isn't exactly the most clean and tidy, but also combat with a bunch of other people to find space, is truly difficult for her. I really like how this episode is framed completely through Kitty's mind, at least at the start, and we get to hear excerpts about each and every X-Men from her point of view. As a matter of fact, I use this episode specifically each time I go back to talk about one of these characters, because it helps me to understand better where each character is at this point in the show, comparatively to where they have started or where they will be in the future. It's honestly just a great tool for me. But also, I just love the concept of episodes like this, where it can start off a little bit slower and definitely focus more on the main characters. And Kitty as a whole, I really enjoy it, especially her inner dialogues about characters.
Professor Xavier is always saying that we're kind of like a family here, and we all have to get along. But Mr. Logan doesn't act like it. He's always going off.
Of course, in Kitty's desperate need to find somewhere quiet so that she can actually write her letter home to her family, she can't seem to find like a single place where she can be alone and actually have some peace and quiet. The living room is cooked because Spike decided it'd be a genius idea to hang a poster up, and she also can't work outside because despite how much Scott likes to be mature, at the end of the day, dude's a teenager with a pretty wicked car, and he's gonna want to drive said car very loudly. This all ends up leading to Kitty finding her one quiet space being in the Blackbird jet before classes in the morning, only for Nightcrawler to come over and bother her because he's trying to get her ready for school.
All I wanted was just 1 minute alone in this whole stupid mansion.
Yeah, not only did Kitty not get her quiet space to write her letter back home via email, she also ended up on an impromptu mission with Logan down to the wilderness of Alberta, Canada, because this entire episode is twofold. With the A-plot, we are looking majority at Kitty, and we're also looking at how she is dealing with living within a family, and the B-plot of this episode, which I'm saving for a Wolverine-centric video for all of you that keep asking, he will get one, is all about Wolverine and his past. Of course, Kitty and Nightcrawler at this point have absolutely no idea what is going on, and it just appears as though Logan is possessed. Not only are they stranded in the wilderness, they also cannot call for help since the communication systems are being jammed, so their only lead is to go follow Logan. Now, Kitty did make the comment earlier that Logan himself felt very disconnected from the family structure that the Xavier Institute tries to present, and I think this episode is highly important for Kitty as it will help her to better understand why Logan is so disconnected from this family structure and why he doesn't really seem to get with it as much as the other X-Men do. It also probably doesn't help that Logan tries to kill her for like the last half of this episode while being mind controlled, so there's that too. But we also see that Logan and Kitty have a very clear connection, especially going forward after this episode, because Kitty is genuinely trying to get Logan to snap out of it the entire time.
Okay, maybe not friends, but close enough.
It takes Kitty not only standing strong in front of Logan, but also damn near falling to her death for him to start to actually snap out of his brainwashing and mind control. But it's also very important to note that Kitty, for all of her faults and flaws, and her belief that the Xavier Institute isn't exactly a whole family, she refused to give up on Logan at all completely. She was actually willing to stand in his face as he tried to kill her and genuinely try to get Logan to be better, to free himself. I think it's a very beautiful scene, and it's one of my favorite scenes from this season. I have a lot of favorites with this show, if you can't tell, because I think it's so great. Now, Kitty does end up going back and helping destroy the entire Weapon X facility, and then at the very end of the episode, not only does Kitty get to find her peace and her alone and her quiet, but she also has a far better understanding of what it means to be a family and to be a part of the X-Men. Also, shout out Kurt.
So, like I said this morning, it's just been another normal day here at the Xavier Institute. Funny, I've been complaining about not having enough time alone, right? But I think I'd miss bumping into everyone. It's just part of the deal when you're a part of a family.
I realize, looking over at my script, there are a few things that I forgot to cover that I just want to quickly note down as Kitty's just some minor character changes. Kitty speaks like a Valley girl, and it kind of gets on my nerves just a little bit because of the amount of time she says like, but I think it also on some level adds partly to her charm as a character, and so it's like a give and take, you know? I think she was used exceptionally well in this first season, and she is the blueprint for what Spike should have been throughout this first season, character usage wise, because she is used so well and so effectively that I didn't even notice until I decided to make this video that she really isn't a major part of a majority of episodes, where she doesn't do much other than provide a couple one-liners and like comedic relief. And I think that's a mark of a character that is extremely well done. Anyways, you can't tell, I love this show, I love these characters, and I also really care about you all, the audience, and I'm glad you enjoy these videos. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you all for watching. For real though, like, thank you all for watching, I appreciate it. You know, if you like the video, please leave a like, it helps out the channel a lot. If you dislike the video, please leave a dislike and then tell me why down below in the comments. Constructive criticism is the only way I can get better as a creator. Now, if you want to subscribe, it's free and you can always unsubscribe later. As well, I do run a Patreon for this channel in which you can just either help support my videos, but you'll also gain access to a few perks such as seeing videos early, getting them completely unedited, no freeze frames, no nothing, no bleeps, anything like that. As well, you'll get access to my member exclusive Discord in which you can converse with me practically one-on-one as I leave all of my DMs open. And finally, if you're in the $5 tier and above, yes, my Patreon does start at $1, you'll be able to be shouted out at the end of each and every one of my videos, just like these lovely people are being shouted out right now. So shout out Gabriel Lafonte, Transcurs1, Video Gamer 75, shout out Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. You guys are the GOATs, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day.